Thank you so much for coming. I know, the morning session went over and afternoon session is getting started on time, or almost on time. So welcome and thank you for coming. So my presentation is about female Martians, and you may wonder actually why we would need to make a case for the female Martian. Well, one reason is you never hear about little green women, do you? And you will find out soon enough that I'm really speaking of Martians in a much broader sense. Much akin to one of my favorite quotes from Woody Allen about how you define an artist. He says, I'm an artist if I say I am. So my take on it is, I'm a Martian if I say I am. So I have an idea that there are a lot of self-identified Martians at this conference, maybe in this room. Maybe you would identify yourselves. Any Martians in the room?
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
Does aspiring count?
Aspiring definitely counts. So I am a Martian by choice, by nature. I have spent a lot of time with Mars over the last few years. Just wrote a novel called Venus on Mars. I'll tell you more about that at the end of my presentation. I'm directing a documentary. You may see me running around with a camera, or my crew, Anna and Sam, seated right in the second row there. My documentary is called Madam Mars, Women in the Quest for Worlds Beyond. I blog on HuffPo about women in Mars and also STEM issues. I am a contributor to the Encyclopedia of Mars, and one of the co-editors, Laura Hendricks, is sitting right here, and you should definitely go to her and Howard's presentation on Sunday morning. And as I said, I'm a Mars One round tour. So, making a case for the female Martian, I am going to give you what I consider some good reasons why we need to do this. Some come from history, some come from the present day, and some actually project us into our futures. But first of all, we're going to go back. Men and Mars, they go way back. They've been kind of paired together for a long, long time. Even before we named the planet for the god of war, some of the other earlier names were like the Death Star, the Fire Star. It was all about mean, bad and mean. So actually naming the planet for Mars was merely formalizing what we already thought about the red planet. Naming a thing is man's nearest approach to creating it, or name it and claim it, we might say. Making a case because men have long laid claim to Mars and Martians. Early scientists who focused their work on Mars were primarily male, and until recently, their work defined what we know about the red planet. These astronomers made their careers observing, drawing, writing about Mars. One of them invented Martians, Christopher Lowell. Meanwhile, there were no comparable female astronomers because women were locked out of major observatories until the mid-20th century, the 1960s. Women were still not able to use the big telescopes at the big observatories. Or, as a historical document from the U.S. Naval Observatory says, it would be immoral for a woman to be alone amidst the equipment at night. Just can't do that. However, another reason to make the case for female Martians is there are stories you've most likely not heard about women's contributions to our knowledge of Mars. For instance, Angeline Stickney Hall was she was a suffragette. She was a college professor. She was a brilliant mathematician. She did the math for her husband, Asaph Hall, who discovered the moons of Mars in 1877 and got absolutely no credit for it. And he said, I might have abandoned the search had it not been for the encouragement of my wife. Here's another story. From the same year, 1877, Isabel Gill can be rightly credited with the success of her husband David Gill's expedition to the Ascension Islands. He was trying to observe Mars at its opposition as a way to measure accurate distance between the Earth and the Sun. Problem was, the site he chose was all clouded over, night after night after night. So one night, Isabel just put on her walking shoes, her Victorian era walking shoes, and crawled over uneven rocks for 5 hours to find a site where the sky was clear. Came back, convinced her husband to move his observatory, And he pretty much did what she said. You can follow both of those stories under what would you guys do without us women. Another reason to make a case for the female Martian, there are female Martians on Earth. We've already talked about, you know, you can self-identify as a Martian anytime you want. But this was the first one. Rexy Louise Leonard. She worked at Lowell Observatory. She was Percival Lowell's secretary. And both she and Lowell referred to themselves as Martians. They lived on Mars Hill. They spent their days and nights observing Mars. She was one of the first women to observe Mars through a big telescope. And she was just as fascinated by, obsessed by, and dedicated to the study of Mars as her boss. But have you ever heard of her? She's actually the inspiration for my novel, which I will tell you more about later. Women from Earth have already visited Mars, at least if you believe the psychics. This is a psychic named Helene Smith. She did many seances during the Victorian era around 1910, started going to Mars all the time. She went there so often she got familiar with the natives. This is one of her drawings of the native Martians. And she learned the language. That is Martian there. I don't know if any of you can read it or not. She spoke and she wrote Martian. Even when she was not in a trance, she was Martian fluent, probably the first person on Earth to do this. Because there are women living on Mars, at least if you believe this woman. 1893, Alice Ilgin Jones and her collaborator, Ella Merchant, who I don't have a picture of, wrote one of the first novels about Mars. This was prior to War of the Worlds, prior to Princess of Mars, a lot of the standards that we know about. In her book, and she called the natives Marsians because no one had started calling them Martians yet. Female Marsians ruled Mars, much to the surprise of an unenlightened male earthling who visits Mars. There are other women living on Mars. Here's one. Anybody ever seen Alita, Queen of Mars? This was the first Russian science fiction movie, and you gotta give her credit. She got the best Martian headdress ever. She spent her time watching Earthlings through her futuristic telescope. She's watching right now. Anybody who's seen John Carpenter's Ghost of Mars? Yeah. Okay. The planet is ruled by a matriarch. There's the matriarch right there, and the laws are enforced by kick-ass women like Pam Grier and Natasha Kinski that go all out to take care of things on Mars. And they're also on drugs quite a lot of the time. Now those are fictional women on Mars. Here's one for real. The first actual female Martian. Sojourner Truth. 1997. Sojourner, if you know this, I don't know if you do, was designed by a woman, named by a woman, a girl actually. She was 12 at the time, for a woman, Sojourner Truth, and was the first, went on the Pathfinder mission to Mars. It was the first Mars rover, and in my opinion, was the first female on Mars. Because there are females exploring Mars today, certainly in a remote sense. William Gibson, the novelist, says if Mars happens to some sensory extension of yourself, Mars is happening to you. So people who Google Mars, the women who tweet out from Curiosity from JPL, certainly the two women on the bottom row, Vandy Tompkins is a Curiosity driver, Ashley Stroop is an Opportunity driver. William Gibson actually has said these women who drive the rovers, or anybody who drives the rovers, should get their astronaut wings. It's the next best thing to being there. Because, most importantly because, we are on the verge of our next great space adventure. I don't know if you can read this shirt or not, but I have one just like it. Mars is there, waiting to be reached. Multiple missions are already underway, as we know, to select those who will go and to exclude those who will be orders.
Now this is the plan. Get your ass to Mars. Get your ass to Mars. Get your ass to Mars.
Just whose ass or asses are we talking about here? Let's look at some numbers for just a moment. 534 humans have flown into space, including this guy. Of those, 57 have been women. However, of the 23 humans who have stepped onto another world or jumped or leaped or cavorted, how many have been women?
Zero.
Big zero. Big zero. Women have overwhelmingly been those excluded. There are some reasons for this. The last time we visited another world was 1972. That was a long time ago and almost a whole different world. At that time, almost a decade had passed since the first woman flew in space, and nearly another decade would pass before the next two took off. For women, opportunities to participate in the first space race were few and far between. Now, I don't know, some of you were around in 1972, others of you weren't, but there were ways to amuse ourselves on Earth. We certainly had our new technology to play with. We had our newest Martian to groove to. We had a brand new communication tool to work as we could communicate with anyone in the world, and Queen Elizabeth was the first head of state to send an email. That's why she's holding up the little envelope. And we got Prozac to stay calm. That's our trip back to 1972. Even though it marked the end of Apollo with our last visit to the moon, 1972 also signaled a new beginning for our examination of Mars as a place that potentially might support life. We got the first complete global mapping of Mars from Mariner 9, and for the first time we're able to see things that seem like signs of running water in the past. And out of the Mariner 9 mission came a renewed interest in looking at Mars more closely. So the orbiters and the flyby mariners were soon followed by landers and rovers, and so Mars became the realm of robots, remote exploration, but no humans. Some people think we should have gotten our asses to Mars a lot sooner, and many people have been disappointed that we didn't take the next giant leap right after those first few small steps. Disappointed that the Apollo money didn't get redirected toward what seemed like our next logical goal, the next world we would reach. We were primed and confident. There were plans and proposals, and sometimes it must have seemed like humans on Mars were just around the corner. But we didn't go then, and we still haven't gone. My opinion is we needed this break between the Apollo program and current programs to send humans to Mars. We needed time to pause, to reflect, to reorient ourselves to a mission that is radically different from earlier manned missions in so many ways. The right stuff for getting us to the moon is exactly the wrong stuff for getting us to Mars. The Apollo moon missions represented one mindset and one goal. The early years of the first space program were all about competition. We were coming out of World War II. We were in the midst of a Cold War with a single-minded pursuit. This was a race, and winning it was the goal. We used what we had to get there, repurposed military instruments, the V-2s captured from Germany, that became our space launch vehicles, with humans rather than bombs as payloads. Likewise, we repurposed our personnel, drawing the first astronauts from the military, at least in this country. We recruited test pilots. Some people say it was the required expediency that led NASA to disregard women from early astronaut selection. Others say it was far more, that no one took seriously at that time the idea of a woman traveling into space. In fact, The Soviets' bold choice of Valentina Tereshkova as the first woman to go into space in 1963 was not a feminist moment, but just another calculated move to jump ahead in the space race. Here's what the chief of the astronaut corps said about her, and here's what the chief designer of the Soviet space program said about her. Nobody took her seriously. Another reason for this pause and for us not to continue the same program and pursue the same goals, recruit the same people, we were not ready to go on in space as a species. We as humans, the big we that includes women as well as men. At JPL, they were still having space-themed beauty contests. A female employee couldn't be a rocket scientist, but she could be queen of outer space. 1972, however, was kind of a turning point for women. A lot of things started happening around 1972 with regards to the women movement. We got Shirley Chisholm's presidential campaign in this country, our first viable candidate, who was both black and female. We got the first issue of Ms. Magazine. I know some of you remember these things. Named for the new designation we had that did not distinguish whether women were married or not. Some people said that was also a passing fad, but guess what? We're still Ms. Most importantly, in 1972, we got Title X in this country, sweeping legislation usually associated with equal opportunity for girls in athletics, but it was really far more. This law called for girls and women to have equal access and opportunities throughout public education, most notably in the science and tech and math courses in which they were routinely underrepresented. This was the beginning of what eventually became known as STEM, science, tech, engineering, and math, and more recently has morphed into STEAM, adding arts to the potent mix. In 1972, and this is why it's personal for me, you got me. Just graduated from college. Fresh-faced, wide-eyed, I don't look that way anymore, eager to begin a career. I was a real space fanatic, but yet in no way prepared for a career in space exploration or the space sciences. No one had ever let me near an advanced science or math course, even when I asked nicely. When I tried to enroll in Trig, my high school guidance counselor told me I didn't have the right temperament for it. So I was shuffled off into the arts and humanities, where I've lived comfortably ever since, but I do feel like I missed an opportunity. So there's another reason we needed to wait. Women needed time to ramp up. We needed time to prepare ourselves for more inclusive futures, from early preparations in elementary school all the way through advanced degrees. We couldn't just jump out of the kitchen into a spacesuit. And you can see the figures here. From 1972, hardly any women earning degrees in these areas, all the way up to huge gains in particular areas by 2006. I think the generational pause gave human rights, and specifically women's rights, a chance to take hold and provided time for more women to prove themselves worthy. So we've now advanced from a manned mission. Everybody know what the new designation is? Crewed mission. Not C-R-U-D-E, C-R-E-W-E-D. Last year, for the first time, NASA recruited an equal number of men, not recruited, but chose an equal number of men and women as new astronauts. First time ever. China's relatively new space program has already established a gender equal norm, including women on all missions to date. And Russia, after a 13-year drought with no women in space, plans to send a cosmonaut to the ISS next month. And yet we're still underrepresented, and people count the numbers because there aren't that many to count. So, are we ready for the newest space age, which is what we're in now? The intervening years from our last visits to other worlds have given us an opportunity to radically rethink and re-engineer missions that better fit our current goals with regard to the next world we intend to inhabit. inhabit. The goal is not to conquer, to win, not even to occupy, but to settle down, sustain ourselves, and survive, perhaps even retire. This is not so much a hero's journey, but an eventual human diaspora, the relocation of an entire people away from their established homeland. We are going to Mars not to visit, but to stay. That makes a huge difference. I think the historical analogy is less like the well-known explorers Columbus, Armstrong, and Aldrin, but more akin to the larger group of mostly anonymous homesteaders, the men and women and children who undertook perilous journeys to what must have seemed like a new world, whose goal was not to plant a flag, but to engineer sustainable agriculture, whose first impulse was not to snap a selfie, but to do the more mundane but necessary tasks necessary for survival. Not just to take a short trip before returning home to comfort and glory, but to build lasting communities. This, I think, is the model we need to successfully and permanently inhabit Mars, to collectively become the first human Martians. As we prepare for our next giant leap into space, there are some questions we still need to try to ask and answer. Will we find that women have achieved pioneering parity at last? When Mars One put out the call for applicants, the only qualification was that you be 18 or older, resulting in the most diverse astronaut pool ever. And of the 287 women among the 705 still in the running, each of these women has a reasonable expectation of being among the first to colonize Mars, because Mars One is committed to sending 2 women and 2 men in the first mission to Mars and missions thereafter. So on this count, I believe we have made significant progress. Another question we need to ask and answer: when we get to Mars, will gender distinctions matter more or less? Some of you have seen this. There's a Facebook group called Aspiring Martians, and somebody posted this. I think you can read it. A few weeks ago. It's actually the beginning of a much longer list, and it's men laying down the rules for women on Mars. Now I know it was supposed to be a joke, but think about it and judge for yourself. I'm not sure we're ready. I'm not sure we're all ready for gender parity on Mars. Here's another more serious question. Are we providing our young women with the education, inspiration, and motivation they'll need to claim their rightful place in the space age? Well, not if we leave it up to corporate toy makers who cannot see beyond the superficial and still insist that girls have this goal in space, Barbie on Mars. This was 2012. This is the year Curiosity landed, and Mattel put out their Mars Barbie. According to Mattel, Barbie is outfitted in a stylish spacesuit with pink reflective accents, helmet, space pack, and signature pink space boots. Apparently all you need to go to Mars, according to Mattel, is a coordinated outfit. How does the fact that we're going to Mars not just to visit, but to build permanent communities affect decisions about who will go and who will lead the earliest Mars missions? The leaders will not necessarily be the biggest or strongest in the group. New leadership models call for leaders with emotional depth, intellectual and cognitive strength, and deep social and community relationships. We need to balance the idea of inclusion with the reality of the mission. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it's challenging. Yes, in some cases it's terminal, as in no return trip back to Earth, but women are just as prepared as men to face these challenges. When we go to Mars, we're going as a species. We come from Earth. There are men and women on Earth. We should all go together. Men and women, all genders, all ethnicities. It's going to take all of us to figure this out. And I don't think one gender can do it alone. So my bottom line is, yes, there will be women on Mars because the newest space age demands this. One more question before I close. Is it our turn? Is this justification enough for the first step on Mars to be taken by a woman? Well, you know, whoever does it, someone who has endured all the rigors of astronaut training, someone who has given up everything, someone who is willing to risk everything for our collective future, that person who's going to take the first step on Mars, and obviously since they're in a spacesuit and a spacesuit, we may not even be able to see whether they're male or female, but we will know. That person is going to represent all of us. And it doesn't have to be a woman, it just has to be a person that represents all of us and that really understands that this is the time, this is the space age, this is the moment for all of us to move forward in space together. That's why it's a huge deal. That's why I'm making the case for a female Martian. Besides the fact that it really is our turn. Before I close out, I have something for you. I have a book coming out next month, Venus on Mars, and my publisher has generously made advance samples available to you. So I'm giving these out. Be sure to get one. I have more up here. There are 2 links on it. One to a soundtrack, because this is a multimedia novel. It has a soundtrack, and one to the text. It's only valid through August 20th, but please take one of these, sample the novel, and stay tuned, because this book will be available with the soundtrack and other multimedia materials in September next month. The other thing I just wanted to mention, I did mention it earlier, the documentary I'm working on, Madam Mars, Women in the Quest for Worlds Beyond. Please keep up with us. We have a website, madammars.com. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We are documenting the challenges women have faced in their efforts to explore Mars, both historically. We're taking it up to the future, and we're taking it into the future, and in particular, we are trying to use this documentary and all of the educational materials connected to it to inspire young women to consider and to pursue careers in space. So I will bring this to a close. I will see if anyone has any questions. I think we have a few minutes. Yes, sir.
Dr. Millsapps, one quick comment. Let's go back 56 years to 1958 when NASA was first formed. They put together a blue ribbon panel of scientists to determine who would be the best astronauts. The results came back women. Now, the obvious thing, a woman is smaller in stature, eats less food, consumes less oxygen, less water. The less obvious things that women could stand extremes of heat and cold better than males. Women could endure more physical pain than males. And women in general tended to adapt more quickly to new circumstances than males. Of course, when management at NASA read that report, they, well, probably wouldn't file 13. It should have been read and
okay, I appreciate your insight. And by the way, the actual first living creature in space was female. It was the Russian space dog Laika.
yes.
Yes.
We have time for one more question.
In the back.
Earlier on, you said that 23 people had walked on those planets. I'm wondering who the extra 11 are.
The other 11?
Yeah.
I was counting all the Apollo people. I was not counting the ones flying around. I think I got it right. I checked it several times. If I didn't, let me know.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. And if you want to see me later,